Hello and welcome to the third part of the Sigma plot video. This part is going to go over how to label and process your final plot so it's in a form that is easy to read and to convert into paste onto our manuscripts or into our Excel document, so it's all nice and looks all good. So on this last page here of the slideshow, it goes through exactly what you need. This is a completed plot. This isn't the exact one we did, but I'll walk you through it in a second, right? So it has in bold at the top as the title, the compound ID, right? So this is the third version of this same compound that's been run, right? So it's, you remember ours was MNA148-1 that we did in part 2. It has in the subtitle here, the notebook page number, and this is the notebook page number of the bioassay, right? So this is wherever that bioassay is recorded, that is what that subtitle is. The date, and this is the date that the bioassay was run on, not the date the graph was made, but the date the bioassay was run. What row this compound was in. So if you remember, our compound was actually in row E. This one was in row A. And then what the IC50 value is. We want to put this in two places. So you see down here, we put this on the graph itself as well. We also want to make sure to put it inside of the subtitle so that it's in two places and easy to see. We also want to label the axes with the x-axis gets labeled as log inhibitor of millimole, right? And that's in square brackets. And then the y-axis gets labeled as fluorescence, right? So I went ahead and I did the labeling here. So it's all done. So you see our title, it's MNA148-1. The bioassay number, the date it was run, what row it was in, that IC50 value we found and we wrote down earlier. And then I put that on the graph again. And I also changed the x-axis. Now the way that you change these things, if you remember, that it just said 2D graph 1 and then x-axis, y-axis. To change any of these things, you can double click on a text box and it'll automatically highlight it and you can just start typing, right? If you want to add a new text box, for instance, for this box right here, the subtitle, or for the one down here that's in the graph, you come up to graph page and into tools, and right here, this text tool, and anywhere you click will add a text box and you can just start typing and it will put the text right on there, right? You can also choose to bold the text. So if you click it once, it'll select it. And so that's where you can move it around with your select tool highlighted. And when you click it once, it pulls up sort of this box where you can change things on here. Additionally, you can also double click to highlight it and to go into sort of that edit mode where you can start typing. And at the top in that same graph page tab is the text tool. So you can change the font, the bold, the centering, any of that kind of things that you might want. You could even rotate it if you wanted to for some reason, but you don't have to ever. And so once you have all of that ready to go, now it's sort of ready for your snipping tool, right? So another thing you want to do when you're snipping this is you want to move the legend out of the way. Since there's only one thing on here, right? It doesn't really matter if it's in the picture because there's only one graph and one data set on this graph. And after this, I'm going to show you how to put multiple data sets on one graph, in which case you want to leave the legend there, right? You never want to delete the legend. You just want to move it out of the way. And that's, again, with your select tool. You just click it once on the outside of this box, and you can move it sort of wherever you want. Now that you have this as it's sort of ready to go, right, you can see everything. If you remember, sometimes this will be set to 0, in which case this point right up here, actually, you can't see it. There's only 8 points on this graph. We want there to be 9. So you need to change this value, if it is 0, to whatever your lowest value was, right? So we copy this into here. and then you can double click to change it. And we want to make this one magnitude of smaller. And that is in order to be able to see it on the graph. So now you can actually see it here. But also to symbolize that this is sort of separate from the rest of it, right? Because this is our theoretically our zero inhibition, right? So if we put in zero concentration, that is what this point would be. If you do this and you put it as sort of one magnitude smaller, you might have to come down and change the scaling, which again you do by double clicking on the x-axis on the actual values. Double click on that, go to scaling, and you want it to start at something that's smaller, right? So if it was starting at 1e to the -4, that point would actually be off the graph. So we want it to be something that is even smaller than that. So we just had 1 -6, and so that point appeared, right? So now that everything is ready to go, you just pull up your snipping tool, which all the lab tool, computers have, and most computers come with it. So you open the snipping tool. You want to make sure that it's in rectangular snipping mode. You click New, and you just make sure that the entire graph is in the window. And now it is a PNG file. So what that does is it actually saves it as a PNG, as a picture. So what you can do is you can save this picture to wherever you want it to go, right? Say you want it to go to a special folder and then you move it later. As long as you know where it is, you can save it anywhere, because after you save it, right? I didn't save mine, but after you save yours, we have this file that has all of our results, right? So here is where that picture would have gone, right? All of our results come in. Sorry about the train in the background. All of our results get pasted into here, and this helps us tabulate everything. It has the structure of the compound, it has the formula and the molecular weight, and then it also has all the IC50 values we found for it. And so this is a really important thing to do. After you finish a bioassay, you always want to take a picture of it and put it in, right? These have the legend in them, but of course, when you go through, you're going to want to take that out just to make it even more clean, right? Now let's talk about how to put another set of data on here. So let's actually delete this IC50 box for right now, and let's get the legend back to where we can see it, right? Now you'll remember that normally this comes as little circles and a solid line. I have changed this because you want to make sure before you try to add a second set of data, you want to change the points in the line to not be that circle and solid. The reason being that when you add a new data, it defaults to those symbols. And so what will happen is you'll actually get mixed up because you'll just see 8 new circles get put on, and they might overlap very closely with this data, right? And so you want to change this before you start trying to add extra data to this plot in order to avoid that confusion. The way you change it is you just double click and make sure all the points are selected, right? And then in the symbols menu under the plot header, you can change the type to anything you want. So normally it's this circle, right? And then I just changed it. I went one up and changed it to star. Change it to anything you want, right? You could even do color, but I would recommend leaving it as black since that is easier to print and easier to see on all the paper. And then you can also change the curve in much the same way. You just double click on the curve, and right here in plot under lines, you can change it to anything you want. So say for instance, you want it to be back at that solid line, or you want it to be any sort of in the middle, right? You can also change the color here. The color may matter here, but if you change the color of the line, make sure you change the color of the corresponding points so that it's easier to read and understand. Again, I would recommend leaving it as black if you can, so that it's easier to print, right? And then what's really great is when you do that, it'll auto update the legend for you. What it doesn't do is update the names. So if you want to change the names, so you see I've already changed the names here, you need to double click on the legend box and it opens that same window again, now under graph legends. And you can see all the things here. So for instance, if you didn't want the line to appear, you could uncheck it in the legend box, and now it's only going to report what those stars are. Or you could open it back up and recheck it to say, okay, that is what it is, right? Let's actually leave that unchecked. And then the way to change the text is with whatever it is highlighted, you just click and change it, right? And so you can type whatever you might want to do, and it'll change it in the box. Let me show you an example after I do this next one. So once this is all set and ready to go, let's go ahead and add our new set of data to this. So in my data tab, I've gone ahead and I've added another set of data. It's the next row, right? MN A148-2. And this was in the next row from what we did from in video 2. Right? So it's just more data. It doesn't really matter what data it is as long as it's here. To add it to here, what you can do is you can right click on the graph, make sure you see that the entire graph is selected, and click Add New Plot. What that's going to do is it's going to open the Graph Wizard work sheet, and then you get to choose all your options here. You don't want to do what we did in video 2, which was click the Create Graph and Create Graph Wizard button. The reason you don't want to do that is because what it will do is at the end, when you click Finish, it'll just make a whole new data page, right? And that is what you would normally want when you're processing these individually on your own. But for this specific purpose of getting multiple graphs and plots on the same graph, you want to do it this way. So again, you right click on the graph, do Add New Plot. Now on here, you want to do Scatter Plot. This is just like in video 2, so I'm going to go fast. Scatter Plot. Want to make sure it says Simple Scatter. You want to make sure this says XY pair, and you got to select it. So the X again will be your concentration, and the Y will be your right here, your fluorescent for whatever data you need it to be, and you click Finish. And there you go. You see all of these circles are now put on here, and those are the points for the second one. And you can see down here in the legend, it hasn't updated that. So it's saying concentration versus column 5, right? Column 5 is this one. So you can, if you double click on this box, you highlight this one, and you change in here the legend text. You can change this right here, and then you just close this box after you've typed it in, and it changes it for you, right? And so now those are labeled as number whatever, right? As MN A148-2. Now to do a curve on here, a second curve, it's very similar to the first one. You just click once to highlight, make sure all of those points are highlighted. There shouldn't ever be another point highlighted. You can see it's close, but it's not actually highlighted. And you come up here to analysis, and we go through all of this again. So I'm going to go quickly. Part 2 again has this a slower version of this. So if you're confused, be sure to refer back to part 2. So we open Regression Wizard, Standard Curve, 4-parameter logistic curve. Check to make sure that max is greater than min and hill slope is equal to -1. Hit Next. Make sure our data is right. So we have concentration, and then the column 5 is our variables. Next. We want, if you want to record, you usually aren't doing this to actually find out what that EC50 value is. But again, if you want to, for some reason, to record that, remember that you need to add 3 to this exponent. So this is actually 3.107 micromole, not 3.107 times 10 to the -3rd micromole. That value is actually in millimole. So you click Next. Want to make sure that Create Report is unchecked, hit Next. And now this is an important screen, so we pause. You want to make sure that this is checked to add curve to whatever the title of this one is, right? So this is titled MNA1481. And so when you make sure that you check add curve to this graph, and do not check create new graph, because that'll just put the curve on its own page. You don't want that. You want this curve to be added to this graph. Once that's checked, you just hit finish. And now you can see, right? Let's zoom in a little bit so it's a little easier to see. You can see that it's comparing the two curves, right? You notice that this one's a little longer. It's because I actually included this point. This wasn't 0. If you had that at 0, the curve would actually start here instead of back here. Really doesn't matter. I've tested this multiple times, and it doesn't change the values that you get from the EC50 in any noticeable way. But now these curves are ready. And if you want to add a third curve, it's the exact same process. Again, you just want to make sure that you go through and change all of these points in this line to something separate, right? And let's say we don't want this. We now do have 2 curves. So we want to open our legend box down here. We want to check this to make sure that the curve is listed. And we want to change this text and to make sure to say that this is actually MNA148-2, right? And close this down. Oh, let's make that actually say curve. So just click this in here and just add curve. And there we go. Close this. And now you can see that those are labeled. And so if we want to add a third one here, which I won't do, but all we do is you make sure they're all highlighted, right? You can just double click on one. Oops, you got to be careful that you don't accidentally select the wrong thing here. So double click on one, change that type to whatever you want. Let's make these squares, okay? And let's make this line, we'll make it long, short, right? So it's slightly different, but it's different enough that you can tell the difference, right? You have to be a little careful to make sure that they're easy enough to see. If they're not, you might have to resort to using colors if they're not very different, right? And that is all it takes to put more than one graph on the same plot. You can do this as many times as you want. Again, just be careful. If they're starting to overlap too much, it'll get really messy and hard to read. So you may have to separate it out into multiple plots. Thank you, and I hope this was helpful.